Good afternoon and welcome to TechCentral's Impact Series. We're very much looking forward to today's conversation, and I'm thrilled to be sitting here in the TechCentral studio with Praven Pillay. Praven Pillay is the Managing Director of Maxtec, and also on the line, joining us the whole way from Israel, we have Sagy, his surname is Kratu. Sagy is based, as I said, in Israel, and he's the Director of Enablement and an evangelist at Orca Security. And we're really looking forward to today's conversation for a number of reasons. Primarily because we assume that our data in the public cloud is secure. We make a number of assumptions about the public cloud, whether we're talking about Amazon AWS, Google, you may talk about Oracle, Azure, or in time to come, Alibaba. Is it safe? Is it secure? How are we monitoring the security of our data in the cloud? And we're very much looking forward to this conversation. And I'd like Praven to please kick us off and just introduce this topic, but also introduce the partnership that's been established between Maxtec and Orca Security. So thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here. I think what's important is, if you look at Maxtec, we've been in operation for the past 3 decades. And we started off with data storage, and over time has evolved into data security, and today as we know it in terms of cybersecurity. Now, I think our relationship with Orca, is very, very specific and niche because we've been in the vulnerability management space for the past 14 years, providing on-prem, off-prem management solutions, and very much agent-based. Orca started off something earlier this year for us, and like you mentioned, it's in the public cloud. And what's key about it is it's agentless. Now, with the day of technology today, we don't need things to be complicated. If you've got, in some cases, customers don't even know the amount of virtual machines they've spun up in any of those public instances. It's because, yes, today we're faced with load shedding, we're faced with global shortages, and you cannot buy hardware. So we've got the public cloud, it's got the infrastructure, it's got the resources, it's on demand, and you can spin up. And as we spin up, we don't know the security of it, we don't know the state, we don't know have they been deployed using best practices, or just as an example, what is the latest view? And when we talk about view, we talk about the security posture. So when we partnered with Orca, and that's something that we've got an exclusive agreement for Sub-Saharan Africa, it helped us provide the solution to our customers and our partners that we fulfilled over the last 3 decades.
So you're talking about vulnerability and exposure. And where does Orca fit in?
In all of them. In fact, Orca at the core of it is vulnerability management, but it's more than that. It's about prioritization. It's about providing movement or through the exposure of certain instances that gives you visibility or prioritization on what you should be looking at first.
Okay.
And that's, again, it's just, it's a key part. So, I like to start off to say, in the beginning, it's about asset discovery, because most customers don't know how many servers, how many virtual machines or instances they have spun up. And, with not having that visibility, it's great. But apart from vulnerability management, they also have the ability about identity and access management.
Okay.
And insecure configurations. I don't want to say too much because I think we leave it for Sagy, to share more of those unique benefits around their solution.
Absolutely. And Sagy, before I hand over to you, I know there are a couple of things, and I don't want to spoil the punchline, but you've also going to share with us some very interesting research that you recently did, which was entitled the State of Public Cloud Security Report 2022. And that's a piece of research that the Orca pod have put together, and we're looking forward to hearing some of the stats that come out of that, some of the key findings. But really important to our listeners to know that what we're going to hear from Sagy is an important illustration of how innovative they've become, how innovative we can be in terms of identifying security of our public cloud, and how the old ways of working don't necessarily work anymore, and I think what Praven's talking about very clearly here, to remove some of the friction that people may be experiencing or may not even know they're experiencing, but is likely to expose vulnerabilities and risks that should be mitigated against quite readily and more accurately and perhaps more quickly as a result of putting Orca Security in place. So, Sagy, over to you.
Thank you, James and Praven, for having me. It's a true pleasure. So, in order to explain exactly what Orca does, I'd like to take you, let's say, down memory lane, a trip down memory lane, where you know how companies had their own data center, whether it's on their premise, in their offices, in their HQs, or somewhere else where it was leased and so on. And the way to deploy a server was measured in days and maybe weeks even, right? You had to order the server, had to have people approve that order, and then install the relevant operating system, and then take that server, put it into the server farm, and then boot it up, make sure everything is right, and so on. And we're not talking about virtualization right now, okay? That only adds to the complexity. So that was measured in days and weeks. Now imagine you do all this, and it's measured in seconds and in minutes. So all these problems, and Praveen mentioned vulnerabilities, visibility. We'll talk about friction between different departments, right? The ordering department, the people who install the software, the people who install the server in the server farm, and so on. All these things just are enhanced and are growing in a rapid pace when you move to the cloud. So the first thought was, when moving to the cloud, was called lift and shift, saying this, you know, whatever we installed on that server, whether it's agent, other software, and so on, we simply took that server, created an image of it, and put it in the cloud. Everything's great, everything works, right? But then you had to kind of work at the speed of the cloud. So new types of development, new types of approaches have become more apparent or more relevant. Instead of that kind, you know, the one size fits all, take that server, put it in the cloud, and so on. So a new kind of job has kind of, let's say, was born, right? The DevOps. And they started working with Lambda functions, right? They started working with containers. They started working with entities or assets, as we call them, that are moving very fast. It takes seconds to deploy, okay? And if you want to fix it, not a problem. You fix it on-prem and then you redeploy it again. So, and then the question is asked, where does security come into play? You know, the first rule of security is, if you don't see it, you can't secure it, right? So the first rule is you have to gain visibility. You have to gain 100% visibility, because 50%, 60%, as if you had like on the data center where you installed agents, but you know that it was behind a lock and key, that was, I wouldn't say it was fine, but it was good enough. By the way, remind me to tell you something about good enough later on.
Okay.
In the cloud, it doesn't work. The cloud is open. And what the cloud vendors provide you is what we call a shared responsibility model, which means that they are responsible for the power, they're responsible for the hardware, they're responsible for the key entering to their server from, and the cameras and the fence around it. But whatever you put on that hardware, it's on you. So if you develop something,
absolutely, so their responsibility ends there, and then it hands over
exactly,
the responsibility of the owner of that data.
And exactly, the software, the data, and this is where, you know, the SaaS, the PaaS, and the YaaS approaches or methodologies come into play. And one of the nice things, or I think the nice things, is that we see the investments of organizations into the cloud just going up and up. It's increasing. From the report we just launched, Gartner says that, you know, today we're talking about around $500 billion is invested in cloud. Okay, not only security, but in cloud by organizations. By the next 4 years or so, it's going to jump to 500 or even 600 billion. Okay, so the investment is there. Okay, organizations are moving heavily into the cloud, and they have to gain that visibility. That old approach simply doesn't work anymore. Not working in terms of speed, doesn't work in terms of visibility, and we'll talk further on the security side of it. Visibility is only the first approach, right? Or only the first item that we have to consider. Now, one of the things that did work in the on-prem, the data center, was, you know, you could install agents because you had one person, two people or so on that are responsible for that. And they said, listen, I'm not flipping the switch, and the server is not going to be available to anyone unless I install these controls. Okay. And people were, because remember, you judged it by days and weeks. Today, when, for example, take Alibaba, not the cloud, but the service, or AliExpress, the service, the Chinese Singles Day, right? The Singles Day. That from, let's assume, from 100 servers, within 5 minutes, they have to jump to 500 servers because of the demand. This doesn't work on a regular data center. You can't deploy more servers because you have to order them, right? Here, because of the service,
Scale it.
you can do it. Exactly. You can do that. But again, the question is, can I install now an agent on these new 500 servers? Probably not. So that means that from visibility of, let's assume it was 50%. I added another 500 servers, it dropped to 10%, right? So the security drops because there's a whole lot of people coming into those servers, all that service, and now it's not secured. So this is what drove the innovation. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
You're talking about a point here, which is scanning your current environment, and irrespective of whether that current environment is either at alpha stage right now, or if it's suddenly scaled to alpha, beta, Charlie, you've now got a totally different array that needs to be scanned. And what I understand is that you and your platform provides 100% visibility of all those assets at all times.
Right. Exactly. So not only today, but also what we call future proof. Now, the reason we can do that, because remember, the cloud is ever changing. So what if I told you, change as much as you want? I don't care, because I don't depend on agents. I don't depend on that person running and installing agents and installing controls. And, my system doesn't have to take lunch breaks. It doesn't have to sleep, but it doesn't need to sleep. And it's not dependent on people doing things that are critical to security in a sense of installing things, going and installing agents and other controls and so on, right? And this is what drove the innovation here. The question that was asked is, why do I need agents? How can I do this without agents? How do I remove that dependency from that? And this is where our 8 co-founders came into play, and I guess sat around, and the proverbial story is sat around a table, like the kings of Arthur, the knights of Arthur, of course, the round table, and came up with an amazing solution and said, we no longer need no longer need an agent. And the way we do that is, I think Praven mentioned it, the capability is called side scanning. It means that we can go into every type of asset that is available on the customer's cloud, the organization's cloud, and simply take a snapshot, okay? Take a snapshot of that at that specific time and start analyzing it. So because we don't depend on anything, only on what we call ephemeral scanners. Ephemeral means that a scanner that comes up and goes down very, very fast. We scan and we remove that scanner, and then we provide all that information. Now, the interesting thing here is that over time, or along, let's say, the past and so on, there were several solutions that did some of this technology. For example, there were scanners, right? CSPMs, what we call posture managers, okay, that did what we call a wide type of a scan, but a very shallow type of a scan. So it gave you the metadata, it gave you some information about the condition of the workloads and so on. Another solution, which we call the workload protection platforms, did a very deep scan of the workload, but not very wide. And we said, hold on, we have this ability now to do both at 100%. And again, remember that when someone comes to you, a salesperson, say, listen, 100%, guys, nothing in life is 100%. And I'm amazed to say that this is. It's 100% of all your workloads, all of the time. All right.
Even if you add,
so you get that.
Even if you
exactly.
add,
So this is what the future proof. Exactly.
Okay.
Once you add a new asset, it triggers our system. We load up a new scanner, a new ephemeral scanner. We scan it. We deliver you the information. All right. So once we have all that information, and think about the worlds of big data and things like that, suddenly you can come up with new types of information by uniting or converging a lot of, like, let's say, single types of information. Think about a huge database. Okay, I usually explain this with, and again, it's much more advanced than this, but think about a huge Excel sheet with infinite amount of columns, an infinite amount of rows that has a lot of information. Now think about, for those who work with Excel, do the VLOOKUP, right? Search for this and this and this and this, and coming with a new type of information that suddenly is becoming tangible and says, listen, you now have a problem with your PCI DSS compliance, okay? Or you now have a problem with your identity in whatever cloud you're using. So when we cross match all of that information, you suddenly come up with new type of information with a heightened level of value to that specific view or that organization.
And when you talk about heightened level of value, it's a value because I can react to it. It means
Absolutely.
I can see there's a risk and I can put a mitigating factor in place to remove that risk.
Right. Right. Let me give you an example that actually kind of makes your point even stronger.
Okay,
let's say you have a virtual machine, okay, that has vulnerability. Okay, it's a vulnerability that's been out there for 10 years. Okay, for some reason you haven't patched it. Okay, not a problem. But we see, and you know, like regular systems, regular platforms will give you a list of 10,000 vulnerabilities on that one VM, right? One virtual machine. Which one would you handle first? But because we have all this information on the side and from the front and from the back and everywhere, we can tell you that this vulnerability does not have a patch. So whatever you do, it doesn't really matter. It's not exposed to the internet. So the level of risk goes down. On the flip side, we can tell you that this vulnerability has a patch, is exposed to the internet, and that's why the risk is very, very high. Take care of that one first. So instead of seeing a 10,000 list of alerts, you would see 10. And 10 you can handle.
Correct. And Sagy, I must say, Praven shared a very interesting demo with me. And I was able to see from the dashboard that radiates information, how you prioritize those risks. And what I was reading is some of those vulnerabilities are actually, they're all categorized so that you can actually separate how you mitigate those risks and how you address them with the correct skills according to who's available or who wants to address those certain issues at any one time. Get your devs involved, get that fixed in order to make sure that your cloud is still secure. And Sagy, thank you. I think you've definitely given a very clear indication of what you do as a platform. And I'm thrilled to see that you've partnered with Maxtec. And I think the opportunities here for the number of companies in South Africa that are going to cloud are very, very relevant. And I also wanted to just touch quickly on your that research I alluded to earlier. Some of the key findings in that, one of which I've got written down here, which is that 78% of identified attacks, their path is to use known vulnerabilities, or CVEs, as an initial access as the attack vector. Now, can you unpack what that really means? Because 78% is a huge number for me when you talk about risk.
Right. 78% is a big number anywhere you look at it, right? Sure. So it's important to put it into context, okay? It means that if you take 100% of attacks, 78% of them are using known vulnerabilities. Now, let me explain what known vulnerability is, okay? And I'll use another number from the report. 10% of vulnerabilities that we found with organizations, 10%, okay, 1 out of 10, are vulnerabilities that have a patch, but have not been patched for the past 10 years. So an organization, for some reason, has known that they have this vulnerability. They know that this has a patch, but this hasn't been patched for at least 10 years. So now when you go to a hacker, and remember, and I'm not saying this now to insult the hacker community, because I learn a lot from them, to say the least. But hackers want to be lazy. They're not going to try and find that exploit that no one found till now, and so on and so on. Some of them do. It's more of a country state type of work that the countries and states do. But the regular hacker, okay, even the medium and the high level one, they're going to go to the CVE database. They're going to look for something that they can manipulate or exploit, and they're going to assume that 40, 50, in this case 78% of organizations did not patch for that vulnerability. So I think I'll start with the one takeaway from this conversation for organizations. Go back to basics, in a sense that make sure that you're patched, make sure that you have the visibility, make sure that systems that are at risk, whatever level you decide is your threshold, are patched. Because that's like leaving the door open. It's not even a key, it's leaving the door open.
My next question for Praven is to ask, what is a neglected asset? But I think you may have answered that question. Praven, what are you experiencing here in South Africa in terms of neglected assets and leaving the back door open?
It goes back to exactly what Sagy is saying. Customers, first of all, don't have visibility. And then if they are running vulnerability scan, they're running it just as a tick in the box.
Okay.
And in some cases, it's overwhelming because you get tens of thousands of vulnerabilities and loopholes, which is not patched. So the scan is done, but there's no priority. Now with Orca, it's giving you the visibility, it's doing the vulnerability scan, and it's giving you the prioritization on your current exposure on what you should be treating off first.
Brilliant. It sounds like everybody needs the solution. And on that note, and I don't want to be, as I said, giving away trade secrets too early, but we're obviously going to share this amazing research with all of our listeners as an attachment to this podcast. It'll be on TechCentral's website, but also attached to the TechCentral's YouTube channel. But really importantly is also to say that at this stage, listeners can know that at absolutely no cost, between Orca and Maxtec, they've very kindly offered to allow listeners a 30-day free trial and access to this platform, kick its tires, see what it can do. And also they offer to actually be guided through a risk assessment. Plug it in, see what it does for you, identify what might jump out that you didn't know about, because your back door might be wide open. So thank you for that offer.
Yeah, I think that's the for us is the price, is to give customers the ability to test it out in their own environment.
Yeah.
Giving them the visibility, like Sagy said, it takes a snapshot, so you're not really impacting the current assets in terms of the vulnerability scan, as opposed to traditional vulnerability scans. If they do find a vulnerability, in some cases you can actually bring that system or application down.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Thank you. That'll be cherished by our listeners. I'm sure a lot of people will take you up on that offer. Thank you for that. We talk about removing friction. So let's go back to that research and talk about removing friction for organizations that are concerned about the security of their data in the cloud, please.
Right. So the idea of removing friction was born because now you have a few departments in any organization that are taking care of the cloud, whether it's the security team that is responsible for the security of the cloud, the DevOps team that is responsible for developing and deploying applications to the cloud. A new group has risen or was born called DevSecOps, who are now also developing, but are also considering the security component within the development process, but also in the deployment process. This is called CI/CD. And the idea here is that if you only take what the security wants to do, it will hinder the work of the DevOps. If you only do what the DevOps want to do, then it will hinder the security. So you would inherently deploy unsecure asset or unsecure application. So what we're doing here, we're actually providing the visibility to the DevOps, to the security. And then what we do, because we can also say, for example, this container was developed by Michael, okay? The security team says, okay, Michael, listen, we have a problem here, but don't worry, you don't have to do anything special. As part of our shift left capability, okay, shift left means that we actually integrate into the development process so that when the DevOps is clicking on deploy, it goes through tests and then tells them, okay, you're missing this package and you're making this vulnerable, or you are missing this capability, or you misconfigured, for example, the IAM role, the identity of the application, or who can access the application. You have maybe misconfigured and put in by mistake an actual password, like in the application. Okay, so someone can actually do that. So immediately that jumps into the DevOps guy, to the developer, and they can go and fix it.
Just to recap that's actually literally happening in the development and the testing phase. So long before anything goes live, the developers get access to that as, call it a bug, call it whatever you like, but it can be fixed before it's even demonstrated to the end user.
Exactly. And it speaks at the language of the developer. Remember that usually the security guys and the developers are speaking in different languages. Okay? So in one sense, this is the security guy is talking in ports, right, and connections in a sense, and the development is talking about services and applications. Yep. How do we bridge that gap? And this is what the platform allows them to do, to speak in the same language.
Okay, thank you very much. And I'm sure what you're saying is definitely resonating with our listeners, because a lot of the listeners we know on TechCentral and are very aware of through the conversation we've been having with them about cloud is they are comfortable with cloud, but maybe that's because they are somewhat unaware of what might be happening in the background. And that's why we're having today's conversation. So thank you very much for all you've illustrated. Before I hand over to Praven to wrap up, I'd just like to make sure, Sagy, is there anything we haven't talked about? Is there anything else you'd like to say to our listeners?
So, like I said in the beginning, the first rule of security is visibility. If you don't have visibility, you're blind. You're shooting in the dark. You're assuming things. The second part is going back to basics in a sense that if you have a system that needs to be patched and is exposed based on the risk level that you decided, of course, that is the threshold in your company, make sure to patch it. Because at the end of the day, the hackers, when they hack the system, they are not satisfied with just going and logging into that first or initial foothold that they have. They're going to look for the highest quality or the highest importance asset that you have in the system. This is what we call the attack path. So
crown jewels.
exactly, reaching your crown jewels. And it's enough to break just one piece of that chain to simply disable that attack. So you don't have to patch everything. Patch the key component that it breaks that chain. And the last thing is to make sure that security is part of the entire development process. Shift right and shift left. Okay, part before deploying it, making sure that it's set, and then deploy it, and then we come in what we call after the fact to make sure that it's good as well.
Brilliant. You're always there, 100% on. Thanks, Sagy.
Exactly.
I really appreciate that. Praven.
Thank you.
So I think Sagy covered a lot of my
certainly
conclusion. But going back to what Sagy started off in the beginning, is he said whether you've got on-prem or your services are hosted in a co-location, what also goes with that is you do have firewalls and you do have additional applications to secure your services and your databases. And with the migration to the cloud, yes, it is easier. It's a matter of a few clicks to set up infrastructure to get servers operational. But there is none of the additional the on-prem firewalls or intrusion prevention systems or web application firewalls, and that's the gap that is left. Now we've seen whether it be insecure configurations or applications that are not patched that can lead to malware, and over time it just it becomes such a huge risk that your whole business is compromised on that.
Of course.
And when you are exposed, it's too late. Now with Orca, giving you that visibility again with zero agents that you are dependent on to have that real time. These are the new assets that have been deployed. Have a vulnerability scan without impacting production environment, and then when there are a list of priorities, helping you focus on what your security posture and what you should be looking at first is most important. And that's why we look at Orca as a win-win situation. It's not just vulnerability management. It's giving you visibility of lateral movement, insecure configurations, malware, and many others as part of the solution.
Brilliant. So if you're only just starting your cloud journey or you're a veteran at it, it sounds as if between Maxtec and Orca, they've got you covered. So Sagy Kratu, the whole way from Israel, thank you very much for joining us. Really appreciate your insights.
Appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, and we look forward to sharing your very interesting research and report. It's very thorough and definitely relevant to our audience. So thank you for that. And Praven Pillay, thank you very much for your time today. Thanks for attending in person. We're really pleased to have you here on TechCentral. I'm James Erasmus. Thank you for joining us at TechCentral, the Impact Series. To follow us, please go to YouTube/TechCentral. And we very much look forward to our next podcast and episodes with you, our listeners, and our guests. Thank you very much.